Hello and welcome to what may just be a very scary Halloween episode of the Flagstaff County Podcast. I'm Cary Castagna, Communications Coordinator for Flagstaff County. You're listening to the official podcast of Flagstaff County. In early 1935, a few decades before Flagstaff County became a county, a farm family in the Daysland area experienced a series of encounters which at first blush appeared to be with a mischievous ghost. Fortunately for us, this 88-year-old tale was documented by the Edmonton Journal and countless other newspapers across the country. And even luckier for us, the old newspaper clippings have been painstakingly retrieved from the archives and published on an Edmonton-based website called Vintage Edmonton at vintageedmonton.com. The website's founder, who has a penchant for the past, routinely posts remnants of bygone eras, including old photos, music, and newspaper clippings. Vintage Edmonton is a fascinating website and is accompanied by a Vintage Edmonton YouTube channel and a Vintage Edmonton Facebook page. It was on the Facebook page that I came across the aforementioned newspaper articles detailing a Daysland area family's brush with what first appeared to be an evil spirit in early 1935. Unfortunately, the man behind Vintage Edmonton was unavailable for this episode, but he gave us full permission for his post titled The Daysland Alberta Evil Spirit to be used on the Flagstaff County Podcast. So without further ado, let's delve into this nearly century-old ghost story. Now, the first newspaper clipping is dated February 11th, 1935. It's a front-page story in the Edmonton Journal, and the headline blares, Daysland Ghost puts pins in food, hurls knives, books. The subhead reads, Cups, saucers are missiles of mischievous spirit in farm home. Mysterious pins keep baby crying. And the story goes, a ghost walks in a farm home near Daysland. It not only walks, it throws things, pushes pins into two frightened little girls, pins in one's food, down one's neck, in the bedclothes. Hurls knives, saucers, cups, spools, buckles, brushes, and books. With Mephistophelian cunning, its unseen hand snatches the pen from an 11-year-old girl dutifully doing her homework, tosses it like a dart into the wall before her bulging child eyes, leaves it quivering there as if to shake a ghostly finger into maniacal glee. Before unbelieving guests, the poker in the fireplace takes wings, lands upright in the soft earth of a fern pot on the other side of the room. The little girl is sent down to the cellar by her mother to get a half loaf of bread for lunch. There isn't a half loaf down here, Mother, she cries. The mother insists that there is, but tells the child if she can't find it to bring up the bread box. As the daughter reaches the top of the stairs, the half loaf of bread, manna-like, falls from the air, caroms off the box, and rolls to the floor before the family's astounded eyes. Magic? It would take a gifted magician indeed, and a devilish one, to perform the reported feats that have terrified the home for some 7 weeks. All right, this front page story continues on page 11. The subheads read, Daysland Ghost puts pins in food. Cups, saucers are missiles of mischievous visitor. Children suffer. And then the story continues, Practical joker? The 11-year-old girl finds pins and needles in her food. Even the most fanatical practical joker would draw the line at that. It was about 2 weeks before Christmas, according to reports, when the eerie events began. The dimpled baby broke the stillness of the winter's night by screaming wildly. The parents rushed to see what was the trouble. A very annoyed little lady lisped that she had been stuck with a pin. They told the child she must have been dreaming, kissed the pouty little lips, tucked her in, and went back to bed. But if the baby was dreaming, her dreams were all alike, for she woke the household on successive nights with cries of pain. The older girl was blamed for teasing her sister, but denied it vehemently, and was so outraged by the accusation she burst into tears. Exasperated, the parents stripped the children's bed and, to their relief, found a single pin pointed upwards. Their problem was solved, so they thought. The pin had been removed. No sooner had the children been soothed and the lights turned out than the baby screamed again. This time, the thoroughly tired mother punished the older daughter as the probable perpetrator of the nuisance. The series of weird events had only commenced, a series that has aroused the district, shattered the nerves of the household, caused the neighbors to speak in hushed and fearful tones of the evil genius directing the play. That same night, screams awakened the parents once more. This time, the screams were from the 11-year-old daughter. She had jumped out of bed, and there, before the puzzled eyes of the parents and children, were several pins sticking through the sheet where the child had lain. The thoroughly aroused household, including the hired man, commenced an investigation in earnest, to no avail. The girl moved to a cot in the front room, and there, too, pins appeared mysteriously, pricking the little girl's flesh as, terrified, she attempted to close her dilated eyes. For context, I should point out that Daysland had a population of roughly 400 in 1935, and according to the most recent census, that number is around 780 these days. Now, the Journal updated the story just a couple days later when Journal staff reporter Gordon McCallum traveled to the farmhouse south of Daysland to confront the so-called ghost. He also interviewed a local priest. Now, this story has many more details. The headline reads, "Priest is sure Daysland Ghost is evil spirit." The subhead is convinced reports of activities are authentic. Ghost is inactive. And the story comes with a Daysland place line and a date line of February 13th, 1935. And the story goes, Reverend Father M.J. Schnitzler, parish priest of St. Peter's Church, 7 miles south of here, believes that an evil spirit is responsible for the eerie doings at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Louis Lansing, 5 miles south of this town. The home is that in which household articles are thrown by an unseen hand, pins are stuck in the two children, and so many strange things happen that it is the district's center of attraction. I am convinced there is something very real here, Reverend Father Schnitzler told the Journal Tuesday, and I have reported it to my superiors in Edmonton. What do you think is there, he was asked. Quite possibly an evil spirit, he said. In fact, I'm convinced that it is. I am satisfied with the integrity of the Lansings, and with that of others who have seen things, and I am satisfied that there is an evil spirit there, and that it is making life miserable for them as a spiteful act. Who supplies the evil spirit, he was asked. Someone who is alive, he said. And does that someone command the spirit from afar? That is, does he need to be close by? He can do it without his physical self being around, the priest replied. Father Schnitzler said that if a priest were sent from Edmonton, prayers would be said, and the evil spirit commanded to leave. This evil spirit, which Daysland people have referred to as a ghost, does strange things, but hasn't been seen yet. What if the priest can't see it? Father Schnitzler was asked. One can't fight an enemy if it is not in front of him, the father explained patiently. The priest will command the evil spirit to show itself and to speak, then will order the spirit to leave, to get out, so to speak. Your reporter went to the house Tuesday and waited for 3 hours for the spirit or ghost or whatever it is to fire something at him, but all was quiet and serene. Not even a pillow moved, and all the pictures stayed on the walls. There wasn't a single groan, and your reporter's hair didn't need to elevate itself even a fraction of an inch. This spirit, so it is said, has hit other people, but maybe he's afraid of reporters. Mr. Lansing said on Sunday it fired a spoon at him, and it bounced on the nose of L.E. Twitchell, a neighbor having dinner there, leaving a mark. Sure, he has the mark all right, Mrs. Twitchell told the Journal Tuesday. He told me all about it. Mr. Twitchell was away. Mr. and Mrs. Lansing have had a great fear that people would think they were imagining things. But when the neighbors confirmed their stories and the parish priest was satisfied with them, they felt better. This evil spirit might not be visible to the eyes of humans, but Mrs. Lansing thinks one of her dogs can see it. The dog, she said, kept watching the ceiling and making his eyes go round as if he were seeing a fly. Then his eyes darted down to the floor, and he snapped at something. Then he yelped and ran. A little later, we found the dog covered with pins, she said. The Lansings told stories of cushions being thrown at them, and of their 3-year-old girl being spanked. Their 11-year-old daughter, who has been in school 3 years and is in grade 6, has been slapped in the face. Maybe there aren't spooks, and maybe there are. Anyway, the parish priest is satisfied these things have happened. Your reporter doesn't know what to think. How about you? And the story continues in another column. The subhead reads, Ghost Story Causes Concern in Daysland. And the story goes, while Daysland residents were at first inclined to scoff at stories of a ghost which has terrorized tenants in a farmhouse in the district during the past few weeks, a succession of stories, which apparently indicated that there was something to it, have given rise to grave concern in that section, according to K.J. Anderson, Daysland businessman who was a visitor in Edmonton Tuesday. With the usual disbelief in ghosts, the Daysland folks laughed at the stories. Now, however, several reliable citizens are reported to have become interested in the matter, and an element of uncertainty and even fear has crept in. Residents of a neighboring farm to the ghost-infested home were reported to have refused to remain so close to the scene of the disturbances and moved out, Mr. Anderson had been told. He could not substantiate this report. These and other reports of weird goings-on have alarmed the people of Daysland, the city visitor explained. When it was reported that a visitor to the household was struck in the face by a spoon with sufficient force to cause bleeding, and with no one around who seemed to know how it occurred, it was enough to cause everyone in the district to wonder just what it is all about. As Vintage Edmonton points out, papers across the country picked up the story and ran with it. Papers in Calgary and Lethbridge, as well as Vancouver, Saskatoon, and Windsor. Here's a story from that same day. The headline reads, Pins Found in Bed and Food. The subheads, Of Alberta Child, Menacing Acts of Ghost Frightened District. The place line is Daysland, and the date line is February 13th. And the story goes, weird happenings at a little farm home near here have aroused the neighbors of Lewis Lansing and flooded the district with tales of a ghost. Kitchen utensils fly through the air, buckles, spools, knives, and books. Fear is felt for the safety of Eucharia, 11-year-old daughter, and object of the reported visitations. Curious neighbors and a newspaper reporter visited the house Monday night, waiting for something to happen. They were disappointed. But Mr. and Mrs. Lansing and Frank Kennedy, their hired man, declare many strange things have happened that are inexplicable. A neighbor was struck on the nose with a fork when a kitchen pot caromed off Mr. Lansing's head, it is related. Mr. Lansing was awakened by Eucharia and her 3-year-old brother crying in the night. They complained of pins sticking in them. Investigation revealed pins were scattered in the bed clothing. Ed Lansing, brother and neighbor of Lewis, declared 147 pins were taken from the food of Eucharia as she was about to eat her lunch. Later, when pins were found in the child's lunch at school, she was permitted to buy her own food. She purchased a package of cookies wrapped in cellophane one day. While her playmates watched, pins were found in the cakes as she started to eat them. A note fluttered to the table as the family and guests dined one evening, advising the hired man to leave. He was away 3 weeks in another district, and strange happenings continued. Another note was found telling Louis Lansing to leave the place, he related. It was apparently written on the toy typewriter of the 11-year-old daughter. Strangest of all the strange tales are these. A belt and then a shoelace mysteriously wound around Eucharia's neck, tightening before the terrified and astounding eyes of the farm home residents. A string of sausage climbed a ladder, charmed by some preternatural power. The child receives a slap in the face, leaving a red mark, yet no one was visible within several feet of her. Here's another story from February 13th. The headline reads, "Family Lives in Terror of Alberta Ghost." The subhead, "Utensils Fly, Pins Stuck in Children, Sausage Climbs Ladder at Daysland." And the story goes, Daysland has a ghost, and Mr. and Mrs. Louis Lansing and family have lived in terror since 2 weeks before Christmas. Kitchen utensils fly through the air, thrown by an unseen hand. Pins are stuck into the children in bed. Pins were found in the children's lunch at school, even in the cakes in a cellophane-wrapped parcel which had never been opened. A note fluttered to the dining room table one evening while guests were present, advising the hired man, Frank Kennedy, returned soldier, to leave. A string of sausage climbed a ladder. A belt and a shoelace wound mysteriously around Eucharia's neck, and she received a slap on the face, leaving a red mark, though no one was within several feet of her. Neighbors have gathered to try to trap the ghost without success, and the family continues to live in terror. Journal reporter Gordon McCallum wrote a follow-up to his front page story that appeared on page 1 of the Journal on February 14th, 1935. The headline reads, "Mischievous Ghost Rests at Daysland." The subheads, "Has not given evidence of presence since Sunday. People convinced." And the story goes, Daysland's spook still is loafing on the job, not since Sunday when he was reported to have gone into a big program of spooky things has he done a stroke of work. This spook, which is described by Reverend Father Schnitzler of St. Peter's Church as an evil spirit, has been making life miserable for Mr. and Mrs. Louis Lansing, whose home is 5 miles south of Daysland. Reverend Father Schnitzler's church is 2 miles away from the home. Do evil spirits really exist? Your reporter couldn't find any spooks. He waited for hours for a spook to walk up, say boo, and go into his act, but nothing happened. But while the evil spirit didn't indicate his presence by shoving things around, there are plenty of people who say that they have seen strange things happen, such as a toy doll being balanced atop a toy teddy bear, a sewing machine drawer handle slowly turning, a dog being covered with pins, sausage being hung on a ladder, pins being put into people's clothing and into their skin sometimes, little girls being slapped by unseen hands, and chairs suspended in midair. The Lansings say these things happened, and so does their hired man, Frank Kennedy. And Reeve Father Schnitzler says he believes them. Take Johnny May, elevator agent at Ankerton, near the Lansing home. I went to scoff, he said, and I was convinced. That is, if I can believe my own eyes, and I do. He was there 8 hours, and not for half an hour all day, but there was something funny going on, he says. He had to duck when a spoon went flying at him. Reverend Father Schnitzler says he has asked for a priest from Edmonton to exorcise the evil spirit. Johnny May says he thinks it is real witchery. Maybe someone threw that spoon at you, it is suggested. No, he says, it came from another room and there was no one there. He too saw a great basket take a swat at the hired man who ducked in time. Cushions have come flying through the air, says Mr. Kennedy, and pins have been stuck here and there, such as in calendars, a toy horse, his clothing, bedding, and a dog. It was this dog, says Mrs. Lansing, which allowed its eyes to rove as if it were watching a fly hop around the ceiling. Then the dog looked at the floor, snapped at something, and went away yelping when that something retaliated. Mrs. Lansing declared that someone is trying to get the hired man to leave. But that, says Mrs. Lansing, is none of their business. Mr. Kennedy stays. And, Mr. Lansing adds, if I am going to die, I might as well do it here. 3 notes have been left, says Mr. Lansing. The first 2 directed that Kennedy leave, and they were burned when he did go away for 2 weeks. The third was typewritten, perhaps on a toy typewriter which Mr. Lansing's oldest daughter received at Christmas time. The first 2 notes said these things would stop if Mr. Kennedy left, says Mr. Lansing. He left, but the things kept on, so you see it gave us a false promise. If nothing else, the incident has given Daysland one topic of conversation. Some say they believe it, some say they don't, but all admit that the Lansings appear to be thoroughly alarmed. Eloy Keenitz, next-door neighbor to the Lansings, says he has heard that someone in the district has a black magic book. He says he saw the Lansing dog covered with pins. The Lansings say that they were told by a person in the district to get out or I'll make it so hot for you that you can't stay. That person, they suspect, may have put a curse on us. Maybe it's all a trick. Your reporter doesn't know, because if there were any evil spirits, they stayed out of sight while he was around. If it's a trick, it's an ingenious one. In Daysland, one hears stories of possible hypnotism, mesmerism, and other manner of isms. And in the Lansing home, one finds Mrs. Lansing busy washing the floors made dirty by dozens of visitors who crowd the tiny 3-roomed house each night looking for the evil spirit or ghost. Now here's a story that the Canadian press cobbled together that ran in papers across the country on February 14th. The headline reads, Alberta Ghost refuses to work as crowd awaits performance. The placeline is Edmonton. Daysland's ghost, or evil spirit, which says witnesses, hurls things about, sticks pins into people, and slaps children, disappointed another crowd of visitors at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Lewis Lansing, 100 miles east of here last night. The ghost, who had a big day Sunday, hasn't done a stroke of work since, but its inactivity hasn't changed the mind of Reverend Father Schnitzler of the St. Peter's Catholic Church 2 miles away, who frankly declares there is an evil spirit loose in the home and that he has sent to Edmonton for another priest to chase it out. Witnesses insist that strange things happen and that no person is playing tricks on them. The next day, the Journal ran the following line on their editorial page. The Daysland Ghost is taking a rest, and from all accounts, it deserves a good long one. The Canadian Press made the following story available to its member newspapers on February 15th. The headline reads, Daysland Ghost keeps quiet after weird visitations. And the story goes, Daysland Spook still is loafing on the job. Not since Sunday, when he was reported to have gone into a big program of spooky things, has he done a stroke of work. This spook, which is described by Reverend Father Schnitzler of St. Peter's Church as an evil spirit, has been making life miserable for Mr. and Mrs. Lewis Lansing, whose home is 5 miles south of Daysland. There are plenty of people who say that they have seen such strange things happen as a toy doll being balanced on top of a teddy bear, a sewing machine drawer handle slowly turning, a dog being covered with pins, sausage being hung on a ladder, pins being put into people's clothing and into their skin sometimes, little girls being slapped by unseen hands, and chairs suspended in midair. The Lansings say these things have happened, and so does their hired man, Frank Kennedy, and Father Schnitzler says he believes them. In the following week, no further incidents were reported, but an RCMP constable from Camrose paid the haunted farmhouse a visit, which the Journal reported February 22nd in a story that offered few details. The headline reads, Police on trail of Daysland demon. The subhead, but spook has been inactive for fortnight. And the story goes, reported presence of a ghost or evil spirit at the farm home of Mr. and Mrs. Lewis Lansing, 5 miles south of here, was given official attention Thursday when Constable Jones, RCMP Camrose, visited the place. The policeman did not say what he had found or what complaint he had taken. The spook has been inactive now for nearly 2 weeks, the Lansing said. 5 days later, the final news story was published, explaining that the whole ghastly ordeal was a prank, but offering no further details on the identity of the prankster or a possible motive. The headline reads, Spook is gone. The subhead, Alberta town's ghost vanishes due to publicity. The place line is Daysland, Alberta. The date line is February 27th. And the story goes, Daysland spook has taken the count. In fact, the spook, who wasn't a spook at all, has been out for 3 weeks, and the folks who know say it's going to remain out of the picture. For over 2 weeks, the mysterious doings on the farm of Mr. and Mrs. Lewis Lansing, 5 miles south of Daysland and 80 miles southeast of Edmonton, attracted attention. The antics included spoons darting through the air, pins slipping into drinking water and food, and a dozen other such happenings. Investigation has shown the strange things originally were started as a prank merely on the Lansing family. When the news got abroad and curious folk by the score came to Daysland in search of the spook, the antics were continued for their amusement. The person behind the pranks remains unidentified, but the pranks have stopped. Everybody in the neighborhood is satisfied the evil spirit has ceased being evil. Life is back to normal. As Vintage Edmonton notes, the Edmonton Journal editorial page had the last word on this Depression-era tale. On February 28th, just the following words on the Journal editorial page. That Daysland spook, it is now admitted, had a very human origin. Funny how many of them turn out that way.